Today I will be talking about Adlerian group therapy. A couple of quotes to start us off. Alfred Adler said, by changing our opinion of ourselves, we can also take charge of ourselves. Really talking about his belief that when an individual feels loved and has worthwhile connections to society, they'll be able to pursue their best selves. And the purpose of therapy is to work to find that connection and make needed changes. Carlson Engler talked about Adlerian therapists taking an optimistic approach that sees clients as creative problem solvers. Given the right framework, the belief is that the client can solve their issues and that are keeping them from being their best self. Key concepts in Adlerian group therapy. First of all, the focus is always on the subjective nature by which we all see the world. So each of us having our own view on that. The inferiority, superiority concept is about Adler's belief that early childhood experiences of helplessness and dependence result in a constant striving to overcome that inferiority and to master the environment. Faulty assumptions formed at that time lead to discouragement, and the belief in that therapy is that those faulty assumptions need to be challenged, and people need to examine and validate their own beliefs and goals that drive their actions. Style of life simply refers to all of a person's cognitions and behaviors, and they result from how a person responded to those early feelings of inferiority. The goal in style of life is to adopt attitudes and skills so that an individual is not unduly influenced by those early feelings. Life goals that people are pursuing in their style of life: simply love, work, and society. Moving to social feelings, the core concept of Adlerian therapy, living in harmony with society. So Adler believed that all of life's significant tasks really occur in a social environment. The goal is to learn how to navigate that environment, and the most fundamental social setting that all of us experience is the family. He believed that group was an excellent place to experience and challenge the beliefs that were learned early on. Present-oriented focus, very simply, the focus is on the beliefs that drive our current behaviors and goals, and so not looking so much into the past, but looking at what's going on currently. Holism, really understanding the whole person, their thoughts, feelings, and actions. The role of the therapist in Adlerian therapy has to do with helping the client to do several different things, like who they are, positively address tasks of life, create positive and satisfying relationships, obtain satisfying work, understanding the spiritual dimension of life, being able to have fun, continuing to grow, and reducing discouragement. So those are some things that the Adlerian therapist is working on providing. Adlerian, skills, reflective listening, we're all familiar with from our early foray into the fundamentals of counseling. You know, that ability to reflect back to someone what I hear you saying. Positive reframing, really helping a person to put things into a healthier perspective. So instead of "I never get things done," reframing that into you have big goals for yourself. Pointing out strengths, saying to a person who feels like they are failing in whatever they're trying to do that they are tenacious and they continue to find ways to move forward in the face of whatever it is that they're experiencing. Validating goals, excuse me, and just saying very straightforwardly to the individual, your goals are clear, and how are you going to get there? So helping the person to validate the goals for themselves. And then nonverbal acceptance, which we're all familiar with, that body language being open, facial expression soft, head nodding and leaning in, things that let the individual know that what they're talking about, you are listening to. When we move on to therapeutic process, pretty straightforward and simple. Number one, Adlerians work to establish trust and communication. They do ask for commitment in a group setting, commitment from all of the individual members to help each other pursue growth, to create a safe environment, and to have their contributions be thoughtful, authentic, and provide non-judgmental feedback. As far as analysis and assessment, in the therapeutic process, individuals will be exploring lifestyle, early memories, family constellation, their behavior in social settings, a lot of different parts of what they believe and what they have learned, and really assessing them. The major assessment comes from the group providing feedback to the individual on what they're hearing as the individual talks through any or all of those particular areas. Awareness and insight comes on the part of the individual as they're hearing that feedback and exploring their thoughts. What is it as they reflect that they're getting out of it as it applies to whatever they are working on. The fourth step, reorientation and reeducation, ask people to rethink and challenge their attitudes and beliefs that are unhelpful, and then commit to a new way of living, using new methods and skills that are derived from this awareness. When we look at Joe's experience, obviously having trouble as an individual, and I'm not going to read through this, everybody has this in their particular presentation, but clearly was having trouble in individual therapy and immediately ran into trouble when he went into group based on how he reacted and then how people reacted to him. So if we apply Adlerian group therapy to Joe, it would look like this. So first of all, clearly Joe did not have a good sense of what Adlerian therapy was or what people were attempting to do, which is understandable since he came into it kind of cold. I would pull Joe into a one-on-one session prior to the next group session and review with him communication. How do you provide feedback? What's the purpose of Adlerian therapy? Ask him to reflect on some of the things that he wants to get out of it. I don't know that he had had an opportunity to establish his own goals, which are very important in Adlerian therapy. The goals are derived generally from answering the question, what would be different if you did not have whatever the issues that you're dealing with? In Joe's case, his anxiety. Rather than focusing on the past, looking forward to what would be different. So helping him to work through that. Talk to him about not judging others and really confirm that he's willing to work at safe and respectful communication. Understanding that he didn't have a good handle on that when he walked into the first session, but making sure that he understood that very clearly before he goes into that next session. So at that point, coming back into the group, he also, even though he introduced himself, he did not really get an opportunity to learn about the others. He did not have an opportunity to talk about what his goals were since that wasn't part of the introduction. So really going back and grounding him in the group and redoing intros for people where both he shares what his goals are, as well as learns what the goals of the other group members are, so that everybody is starting from a similar place. I assume that they did that initially, but Joe wasn't there, so he kind of got left out of that part of the group bonding experience, if you would. So once the group has done that, they've shared their goals and maybe answered the question for themselves. Perhaps we would let Joe experience what kinds of things can go on in group for himself by asking him to share one of the types of things that Adlerian therapy looks at. So maybe his family constellation, childhood memories, behavior in social settings. So in this particular instance, I suggested that he share childhood memory and receive the feedback from the group as far as what they are hearing in relationship to what Joe's goals are. So that he can experience the power of the group getting to know him and to understand him and to share with him their understanding and knowledge of the issues. Once that's happened, Joe then needs to reflect and process on the feedback in relationship to his goal. Hopefully he'd be able to talk about, based on what he was hearing, what might be different going forward? How might he move forward differently? This might not all occur in one session, but hopefully he will get enough out of that first experience to then be able to move forward in a positive way, and that it would also address issues from the group that they were having relative to his behavior. I want to move on to multiculturalism and diversity and how Adlerian group therapy addresses that. We all know that the APA Code of Ethics requires counselors to recognize how culture does affect the way in which clients define their problems, as well as how they define them and what their experience is. And Adlerian therapy really supports this well because it does not impose westernized ideas. It really asks each individual to focus on their own experience, whatever their family structure, childhood recollection. Those are the things that they're going to work with, not things that are imposed from the outside. Secondly, because it is grounded in holism, the belief is their only way to understand it is within the social relational context. So whatever that context is has to be honored in order for it to work. And finally, providing a social focus, which allows a client to really examine their issues in from the perspective of their own community. So as far as strengths and weaknesses for Adlerian group therapy, it is very appealing and has several strengths in that it's practical. People really are focused on dealing with the here and now, the present. What are their issues? Yes, they look to their past to help define what that is, but really looking at what am I going to do now to address whatever issue I'm working on. The therapeutic steps are straightforward and simple, the 4 steps that I talked about earlier. The goal is always application. So it has that active force behind it of asking people to really do something with the information. And it is supported by national and international organizations. So it's recognized as a valid therapy. Its weaknesses lie in the fact that it does have a lack of depth and may not be more effective with more severe disorders. We're not digging in deeply. We are staying in the here and now, and that might not always work. There are an overwhelming number of concepts when you start getting into family constellation, some of the other things that I mentioned, and some of those concepts are difficult to define. Additionally, there is not a lot of evidence regarding efficacy in the research, not necessarily so much that it has proven to be ineffective, but rather there just hasn't been a lot of research done in that area. And applying this to a specialty group application, I chose not a study, I guess a write-up on a procedure that was done with troubled youth, and thought that it was a very powerful application of Adlerian theory combined with strengths-based therapy, the 2 of which are very closely related, and some people even attribute Adlerian therapy as being the beginning of positive strength-based therapy. So this particular study was done with male teenagers in a residential treatment facility. They volunteered, and this was in addition to other therapies that they were doing, a couple of different ones throughout the week. And these are the 12, there was a 12 session process. And I want to just talk a little bit about what happened in each of those sessions. The goal was to increase their positive emotion and their engagement, and to do that by emphasizing their strengths as opposed to looking at what went wrong. In the first session, the teenagers were given a list of 24 signature strengths and asked to select 5 of them that applied to them. In the second session, they then looked at identifying specific goals using those signature strengths. So that ability to say, here's what I need to do based on what my strengths are as opposed to somebody else's. And I stopped here for a minute because I see that I have a line out of place, but I'm going to go on and come back to that. Identifying areas that need additional attention to increase happiness is really down later on in one of the later steps. Third session, they did then go on to create SMART goals using those signature strengths. And they were asked to start a gratitude journal wherein they wrote 3 good memories each day. And that was really designed to remind them that they can create their own destinies. And so starting to look at the good as opposed to just the bad. Session 4, some education around how good and bad memories affect you. They did identify a positive memory, shared it with the group, and talked through how that might support their goals that they were working on, what they might use from that. In session 5, they focused on forgiveness, and that is as an expression of social interest. So forgiveness doesn't mean forget about it, but rather trying to get them to look at replacing the destructive response to relationships and turning that into something that is more usable. They were asked to write a letter to the transgressor and then process how it would feel to forgive that person. And again, the thought and the context that was given to them was in one of, being able to figure out how to function within a social group, even when you have things that were difficult and hurtful. In session 6, gratitude was linked to having a higher sense of abundance. And a tendency, the goal is to have people, when they focus on gratitude, they tend to notice and appreciate the contributions of others more frequently, which is very important in looking at that functioning and within society. Session 8 focused on a word I had not heard before, satisfying instead of maximizing in decision making. And this was about learning that being satisfied with something is acceptable as opposed to only making a decision or forcing the decision to be one which was perfect. Understanding that there are things that you can settle for that are completely satisfying, that aren't the perfect decision. And talk to them about not yearning for something that was out of reach, because that was not helpful, but rather looking at what is within my reach and then how do I gain satisfaction from that. Session 9 was about optimism and hope, and really asked them to notice their strengths and take action to reach their goals. And also about hope theory, which I thought was which was interesting, where it's shown that individuals move closer to their goals when they perceive that the goal can be achieved. And so it kind of goes back to that, looking for what is it that I can actually get done that is realistic, because that is more than likely to increase my level of hope about what I'm able to get done. Savoring, being mindful, and connecting to things that you enjoy. And the studies show that, and they worked on meditation in this one, where they really focused in on how to be completely present with whatever it was that they were appreciating. And that does help people to develop compassion and empathy, which then helps them to connect better societally. Session 11, gift of time. That was a gift of their time to others. And then talking about what that felt like. Usually, when people do give of their time and self to others, it has a positive impact. And they shared their stories of how they did that and how that made them help or feel. Again, to increase their social connection. And then finally, looking at what a full life is and what the meaning of that is. So it's a good life from the standpoint of what I have, but it's also a meaningful life by who I am and how I participate in society. The results of the specialty group, it was positive. There was a greater response on the part of participants to positive interventions than previous interventions that were problem focused. So interventions that focus them to the future rather than looking to dealing with the past. They did report more positive climate within the unit or this place that they were in. The facility, it felt less institutional. And it was noted that their behaviors that they were learning inside the group spilled over into their peer interactions outside of the group. It created opportunities to perceive the world in a more positive way. That sounds very simplistic, but if you think about it on a day-to-day basis, how does one make that shift without some external push to do so? They would not necessarily have gotten that from their peers or what was going on in their world. This sessions helped them to find a way to focus on that. They did have a realization of how their choices and their power to choose was what they could bring to interacting with the world, that it was their choice, what they wanted to do. And finally, participants did report being able to prioritize what was significant for them. So just looking at this 12-week program, I can't even imagine this group that had never been exposed to these ideas and having time to work with it and apply it to their lives. It did seem to make a real difference for them. Here are my references, and thank you for listening to